Chapter 286, A Taunting Smile. In the clock tower of East Balam Dock, Klein hid in the darkness, while donning a clown mask as he quietly stared at the dormitory of the dock union. An airship floated above. He couldn't see the details of the battle, and he had no way of knowing the developments of the operation in the red brick building. All he could do was endure and determine the situation by observing the changes in the surroundings and the occasional black dot that passed by. Just then, he saw all the gas lamps in the area extinguish. All of them had been extinguished. It was pitch black there. Right on the heels of that, a feeling that left an extremely deep impression on him exploded from the small red brick building. Even from a long distance away, Klein couldn't help but tremble all over. His legs went soft, and he bent his waist. It was the feeling of being looked down upon, a feeling that repressed one's spirit. It was a feeling that was impossible to resist or face. In his adrift thoughts, Klein seemed to recall the time when he was in the hall of the Blackthorn Security Company. It was like when he was about to activate his spirit vision to probe the mental state of Megose and the baby in her womb. He thought,
"Do not look directly at God." That feeling was exactly the same as it was now. No, it's even more extreme and terrifying right now. How could this be? Wasn't Lenevis just bestowed with a little bit of the true Creator's godhood? At most, he would be given one or two other corresponding items. Why does it feel like an evil god is about to descend?
Before Klein could shake off the trembling of his body and the numbing of his thoughts, he suddenly felt a deep, serene, and profound darkness engulfing the feeling that couldn't be looked at, probed, or resisted. The two sensations were obliterated at the same time, causing the gas lamps in the surrounding area to light up once again. The airship, which couldn't stop itself from plummeting, floated back up again. Everything seemed to return to its original state, without the slightest change. But Klein didn't believe that everything was over. He stood up with all his might, knowing that something important had happened in the red brick building. He thought,
"The feeling that exceeds a beyonder, at a fundamental level, is no longer there, nor is there the feeling of the descent of an evil god. This means that the true creator, or Lenevis's plot, has failed. However, the Nighthawks must have suffered some sort of serious blow as well. They might not even have much strength left."
At that moment, Klein's heart stirred. He quickly took out the spirit pendulum inside his left sleeve, holding it with one hand as he said in a low voice,
"Lenevis is no longer dangerous at the moment."
After quickly repeating it 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw that the topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise. However, its frequency wasn't fast, and its amplitude wasn't large. This showed that Lenevis was still a dangerous man, but to a lesser degree. What caught Klein's attention was something else. He realized
the divination hadn't failed again.
A cold wind blew, seeping deep into Klein's bones, causing him to shiver. He felt as if an electric current had instantly drilled into his brain from the soles of his feet.
"Maybe I can do something."
He suddenly had this thought and no longer hesitated. He took 4 steps counterclockwise in the dark clock tower and went above the gray fog. Without wasting any time, he sat down and conjured a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and wrote a divination statement, Lenevis's escape route. Klein leaned back, quickly chanted the statement, and entered a deep dream. In that illusory, separated, misty world, he saw the slush-filled sewers with their dark, dirty tunnels and rusty metal pipes. It was cramped and sealed. He thought,
"It's the sewers."
Klein immediately woke up, enveloped his body with spirituality, and descended into the gray fog. As soon as he returned to the real world, he took a few steps back and came to the side of the clock tower that faced away from the airship. Klein didn't walk down the spiral stairs, but instead somersaulted over the dark yellow fence. With the help of the platform, the bulging spots, and the decorations on the surface of the building, he jumped down level by level. His body was so balanced it was as though he was walking on the ground. In a very short period of time, his feet stepped on the thick flagstones on the street. Inside the small red brick building, 2 Nighthawks wearing red gloves had collapsed by the door unconscious. The ancient silver-plated mirror had rolled to a corner, but it was no longer special. It no longer looked anything like a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, one could clearly feel that it was recovering bit by bit. Crested Sesamir was kneeling at an intersection. A stream of tear-like blood streaked down the corners of his eyes. His short golden-brown hair hung limply, and his standing collars on his trench coat and shirt were in tatters, revealing his relatively sharp chin and his thin, stiff mouth. Gasping for air, a distorted, semi-illusory and translucent face appeared on each of his teeth. Sesamir braced himself with his left red-gloved hand on the ground. With difficulty, he straightened his neck and looked straight ahead. Directly in front of him was the staircase to the second floor, above which stood Lenevis, who had his linen shirt completely unbuttoned. Lenevis stood very straight, with the pure, white, smooth, bone sword stuck in his chest. The skinless flesh no longer formed the outline of the hanging man's figure, leaving behind a void. Vaguely, one could even see his back through the hole in Lenevis's body. Lenevis moved with great difficulty before suddenly laughing loudly. He said with a maniacal laugh,
"Ha ha ha ha, thank you. I really need to thank you. For real. Look at my sincere eyes. I really want to thank you. If you hadn't discovered me and arrived in time, I would truly become the vessel of the true Creator when He descends in a few months. When that happens, how different would it be from dying?"
Sesamir was stunned when he heard that. He refused to believe that the person who had his crutch destroyed, thanks to his hard work, would be so happy. At that moment, he wished to stand, but he couldn't. He was also powerless to resist. When Lenevis saw his confusion, he coughed and said with a smile,
"Do you know? To people like me, it's the most miserable thing, when there's no one to share a great accomplishment that I'm proud of. Cough. When I was in Tingen City, I was deceived by the true Creator, who not only initiated the descent of his spawn, but he also secretly planted a sapling in my body. No, I even believed that Magos's child was just his ruse. He didn't even get the members of the Aurora Order to protect her, to divert attention. It was as though he knew from the beginning that the ploy would end in failure. His true descent was set up inside me. The godhood he bestowed upon me suddenly combined with the sapling in my body after I reached Backland. Haha, can you imagine that? I was being replaced bit by him. In the end, I would become the true Creator. Before I came up with a solution, I was found by the members of the Aurora Order through the godhood. Thankfully, they're all lunatics with simple brains. Haha, there are always so many fools."
"Cough! Cough! Cough!" Lenevis spat out a mouthful of foul blood, seemingly recovering some of his mobility. He took a difficult step forward, and his chiseled face suddenly turned soft for some unknown reason, as he began resembling his original self. Lenevis reached out to the staircase's handrail and laughed tauntingly.
"Thankfully, if the true Creator wishes to fully descend and completely replace me, he'll need large amounts of pessimism, despair, numbness, resentment, and primitive evil. Only Backland, only East Borough, the factory and dock area, could satisfy his requirements. This gave me a chance to interact with others. I knew that it was unrealistic to report this to the police simply through the people I interacted with, because the people I come in contact could very well be members of the Aurora Order. I initially wanted to instigate a strike to get the police to notice me, but I was warned by someone from the Aurora Order. After being tortured, I could only hastily end it. I acted as though I was on the brink of losing control and had gained the opportunity to head into the sewers to vent. During this process, I secretly used my blood to corrupt the creatures living in there, turning them into terrifying mutated monsters. Unfortunately, before you could fully investigate the reason behind it, it was discovered by the Aurora Order. Apparently, a member of theirs died under a mutated monster. Sigh, now that I no longer have the godhood or the sapling, my blood no longer has such effects. After that I was controlled even more strictly, but I still found an opportunity. I killed a prostitute and used the cruelest method to attract the attention of the police, but who would have thought that the people of the Aurora Order would disguise the case as part of series of serial murders? I still failed to receive the rescue I needed. Out of similar opportunities, I could only use a more ingenious method. I took the initiative to request for the fiercest, craziest, most radical member of the Aurora Order to watch me, and this suited their thoughts. Hee, can't they use their brains? Such a lunatic would get into trouble at any moment. As expected, you guys came.
Phew. At that moment, Lenevis exhaled and began to move his body, as if he had finally gotten rid of the remnant effects. He pulled out the holy bone sword from his chest and said regretfully,
What a pity. I can't take it with me. Otherwise, I would be quickly tracked and found by you.
After the pure white bone sword completely separated from his body, not a single drop of blood remained from the exaggerated wound. The part that had disappeared didn't seem to belong to Lenevis. Lenevis pressed his right hand against his chest, bowing as he faced Crestet, Sesamir and company.
The people on the airship outside should be recovering soon. I can't stay any longer. Thank you very much. Although you're all very stupid, you still ultimately helped me. It's an honor for foolish bastards like yourselves.
Having said this, he straightened his body and smiled tauntingly.
Goodbye, foolish Nighthawks. Use your lives to send me off.
Grasping the bone sword in his hand, he abruptly took a few steps forward, attempting to stab at Crestet Sesamir. But at that moment, his eyelids began to grow heavy, as he felt like collapsing into a slumber.
So you still have some strength. This is troublesome.
Lenevis bit his tongue gently and suddenly threw the holy bone sword at the unconscious Nighthawk by the door.
No.
Sesamir waved his hand with the strength he accumulated through painstaking means, causing an invisible entity to divert the holy bone sword. Lenevis seized that opportunity and dashed to the side. He somersaulted out the red brick building through the window at the washroom at the end of the corridor. Soon after, he opened a manhole cover along the streets and quickly climbed into the sewers. Lenevis seemed to be very familiar with this place. Even though it was dark, he could still run, jump, and turn, quickly fleeing deep into the maze of sewers. Suddenly, he instinctively stopped and leaned back. Oof! A card had stabbed deep into his right chest, and blood began dripping profusely from its edge. Lenevis looked up, and with his ability to see in the dark, he saw his attacker. It was a medium-sized man in a worker's uniform, wearing a mask with a raised mouth and red nose. It was a happy clown. Chapter 287, Death Battle. The moment their eyes met, Lenevis suddenly ducked and rolled forward. Clang! A tarot card with an angel and trumpet shot out sharply like a dagger, embedding itself into the wall of the sewer, and its position was at the same height as Lenevis's neck just moments before. Clang! 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 Lenevis either rolled, jumped to his side, or threw himself forward, nimbly avoiding the three cards that came in succession with abnormal agility. Their collision with the walls, slabs, and concrete echoed like metal striking a wall. Meanwhile, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the man in the clown mask was following him closely, not much slower than he was. In his hand was a thick stack of cards as he launched them with great familiarity and skill. On the surface of an approaching card was a sun with 5 facial features. With his left hand, Lenevis propped himself up against the wall and leaped into the air, drastically changing his course. At that moment, he heard a swishing sound before suddenly feeling a sharp pain in his ankle.
He launched 2 cards? One arrived slightly late and was aimed in the direction I was escaping in? Can he foresee my movements?
The moment he landed on the ground, Lenevis endured the pain and rolled once again. Clang! Another tarot card embedded itself into his original position, resonating constantly in response to the impact. It was only then that Lenevis noticed a card deeply embedded in his right ankle, the card depicting stars, water containers, and holy water stained in red. Sue! 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 Lenevis didn't even have the luxury of time to think or treat his injuries. One after another, the cards turned into seemingly sharp flying daggers, shooting at different parts of his body. Very soon, the injuries on his right leg and chest, and the remnant effects from the hole in his chest, as well as the prior demigod-level clash, caused this Sequence 9 marauder to turn sluggish. This was in contrast to the nimbleness and speed that marauders were known for. Pow! He sent a card flying, but a deep laceration tore through his wrist, one that kept bleeding profusely.
The Nighthawks and the military will be coming soon. I can't delay any longer.
At this moment, Lenevis's mind was very clear. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and stopped dodging, allowing a card depicting the devil to strike him squarely in the neck. In almost an instant, the cards sticking out from his body were sent flying. The hideous wounds on his neck, right chest, wrist, and ankle were all squirming madly, sprouting one meat tendril after another in disgusting shapes. On his skin, numerous small goosebumps appeared. These goosebumps had a metallic tint to them as if they had turned into a set of armor. Clang! A tarot card was shot over, but it was deflected by the fine goosebumps. With bloodshot eyes, Lenevis stared at the clown who had put away his cards after coming to a halt. He said, half laughing and half mocking,
No matter what, after being tormented by a deity, one will always get something in return.
Before he could finish his words, he had already jumped over the polluted waters in the canal with his left foot, throwing himself at the enemy opposite him. As if expecting this, Klein stepped to the side, pulled his left hand out of his pocket, clenched it into a fist, and threw it at Lenevis's temple. Bam! Lenevis swung his elbow sideways and raised his forearm, accurately hitting his opponent's fist. The explosive force surged like a torrential tide, causing Klein's body to move from the impact as he staggered a little. Pa-pa-pa! Crisp, explosive blasts sounded in Klein's ear. Punches, each heavier and faster than the last, constantly reflected into his eyes. The flurry of attacks made him seem to forget to maintain his balance. He staggered and fell to the side. Then, with the support of his left elbow, he rolled in a different direction. Smack, 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 bang, bang, bang. Lenevis's punches and kicks came quickly and furiously, almost hitting Klein quite a few times, but thanks to his exaggerated balance and movements that defied common sense, he managed to dodge successfully. At times he would be on the wall, and at other times on the ground. It was as though he was performing an acrobatic act. He appeared very calm, without the slightest bit of impatience. It was as though he had decided to drag out the battle as long as possible until the Nighthawks and the military arrived. And once there were any signs of Lenevis's attempting to escape, he was hell-bent on pestering him and not give him an opportunity to do so. Pah! Lenevis's punch forced Klein to use the rebound from the wall to fly back into the air, and as for himself, he didn't hesitate to turn around and flee towards another tunnel. The moment Klein's toes touched the ground, his body shot out like a cannonball as he pounced straight for Lenevis's back. No. At that moment, an image appeared in his mind.
It seems as if Lenevis has no bones. I should force him to twist his upper body and land a punch on his body.
This was a clown's intuition. Without any doubts or hesitation, Klein took the initiative to reduce his subsequent strength. With a smacking sound, he still threw himself forward, but it was much weaker than he expected. Gotcha! With a jarring noise, Lenevis twisted his upper body suddenly while his legs remained immobile. His face faced backward as his toes pointed forward. In such a terrifying scene, Lenevis threw a punch towards Klein's head. The force of the punch was so strong that even the air produced an explosive boom. Boom! His fist hit nothing but air, and his fist was still 20 or 30 centimeters from Klein's face. The winds that stirred from the punch blew through Klein's hair, but he didn't take the opportunity to attack the enemy. Instead, he croaked a single word in ancient Hermes.
Crimson.
A charm?
Lenevis scrunched his face as he immediately jumped to the side in a bid to dodge the impending attack. However, Klein had yet to throw out the charm. Instead, he clenched his left fist tightly and followed in the direction of Lenevis. He similarly threw himself to the side and rolled on the ground as well, causing the distance between them to only widen slightly.
It was a bluff.
Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the highly raised corners of the clown's mouth were clearly reflected in his eyes. There was also a dark red flame which had unknowingly ignited in the clown's left fist.
This.
Lenevis's gaze immediately froze. A light crackling sound entered his ears, and a calm, tranquil feeling emanated instantly, enveloping him and Klein.
What is he trying to do? He wants both of us. That was a ha to be affected at the same time. That was a he waras. That was a ha med jalachla. That was a ha med jalachla ba was a ha he were. That was a se ha. That was the fa med jalachla. That was a se ha med jalachal. The Nighthawks in military. That was a sawash here in time.
Lenevis's eyelids drooped heavily, and the fatigue and weakness he had been suppressing began to rear their heads uncontrollably. He did his best not to fall asleep, hoping to rely on the uniqueness of his body to endure through the most intense period of the charm's slumbering effects. As for Klein, he didn't choose to resist at all, and quickly entered a deep slumber. However, whenever he fell asleep unnaturally, he would instinctively wake up. This was the unique thing about him when fighting mediumship and dream invasions. This was the reason why he had been lucky enough to escape from the hands of Madame Sharon back in Tingen. In the fight just now, after throwing his cards proved ineffective, he immediately took out the slumber charm and gripped it tightly in his palm, waiting for the opportunity to affect himself and his enemy. In just a split second, he forcibly broke free from the abnormal state of mind in his dream. The figure of the staggering Lenevis was clearly reflected in his eyes. Phew! Klein suddenly became very calm, as though what was before him was nothing but a target. He took a deep breath, turned his waist, and pulled back his shoulder before thrusting his fist forward with all his strength. Bam! Kacha! His fist landed ruthlessly at Lenevis's throat, breaking his bones and splattering his flesh. Lenevis took 2 steps back and leaned against the wall. That intense pain finally allowed him to extricate himself from the slumbering effects, but the fine iron-colored goosebumps on his body were all gone. After Klein's punch landed, he reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out 2 cards. Sue! Sue! The 2 cards each stabbed into an eye as scarlet liquid gushed out. Lenevis surprisingly endured the pain without letting out a tragic cry. Instead, he abruptly threw himself forward in a bid to make his last stand. Klein didn't take advantage of the situation to attack. Having long expected this, he turned his body to the side and took a step back. Right on the heels of that, while seizing the moment when Lenevis's fell forward, he took 2 steps and arrived behind him. He reached out with his arms and grabbed his enemy's neck. Kacha! Klein's arms exerted force, and he suddenly turned around, twisting Lenevis's neck. After doing all of this, he took 2 steps back and looked at his enemy. With the card embedded in him, Lenevis looked ahead weakly as he slumped to the ground. At the same time, he was very confused and asked in a staccato manner,
Why do your rifles want to kill me?
With his clown mask on, Klein stared at his archenemy and replied indifferently,
No reason.
No.
With his eyes wide open, Lenevis collapsed to the ground in the sewers, unable to accept his fate. Finally, his breathing came to a stop. At that moment, Klein, who seemed to be extremely calm, suddenly stepped forward, tightened his right leg, and with all his strength, kicked him in the head. Bam! His neck, which was already badly mutilated, could no longer bear the pressure and was sent flying like a rubber ball. It slammed heavily into the wall, creating a red and white patch. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly crouched down.
Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha.
He laughed crazily with a suppressed voice. The clown mask looked so very happy. The corners of those raised lips, the bright red nose, and that white face wore a very happy expression.
Ha 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 ha, ha ha ha.
Klein laughed so much that he went out of breath. His laughter was more jarring than crying. After a few seconds, he finally calmed down. He slowly straightened his body and winked with his left eye at the darkest part of the sewer. Then he smirked and muttered to himself,
Captain. Look, we've saved Lowen once again.
Droplets of liquid quietly slid down and landed on his collar. At that moment, he felt that his clown potion had been digested completely. Chapter 288, A Scene Filled with Symbolism. In the dark sewer, Klein wiped his neck and turned his attention back to Lenevis's cracked head and decapitated body before turning to the 2 tarot cards that were stuck in Lenevis's eyes. He originally wanted to retrieve all the projectiles that he had thrown and wipe the scene of any clues. However, he realized a very real and extremely serious problem. He didn't have the vision to see in complete darkness. He had relied on his spirit vision to rush through the pitch-black sewers and engage in the intense battle with Lenevis. He could see the colors of Lenevis's aura, the spirituality radiance of all sorts of critters, and could faintly use the light's illumination to distinguish the path. Unfortunately, the tarot cards he was currently using weren't the same as the ones that had originated from the Nighthawks. It didn't have any spirituality or silver engravings, and it was completely ordinary with no special characteristics. In such an environment, Klein could use his own aura's color and spirituality radiance to create a tiny radius around him where he could distinguish things. However, he couldn't see the cards stuck in the walls and ground, as well as the cards that had scattered everywhere. In the intense battle with Lenevis, they hadn't restricted themselves to a particular spot. Of course, he believed that as long as he had enough time, it wouldn't be difficult to find all the cards he had thrown out. But the main problem was that the Nighthawks and the military on board the airship would arrive at any minute.
I can't be too careless regarding this. I've been wearing gloves all this time. This deck of tarot cards was bought before coming to Backland and is standard across the nation. I don't usually use it most of the time. Even if I have it with me, it's placed together with Mr. Azek's copper whistle. Regardless of what methods are used, it would be very difficult to locate me through them. At most, they would be able to restore a portion of the battle scene. I donned a mask, and my shoes are padded.
All sorts of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, and he quickly came to a decision. He turned to the headless corpse and crouched down. Reaching out with his black-gloved right hand, he quickly searched for any items left behind. Klein didn't have the intention of carrying out a mediumship ritual. Firstly, the feeling of the evil god's descent had left a deep impression on him, so he didn't dare to blindly channel Lenevis's spirit unless he brought it above the gray fog with him. Secondly, with the situation of the Nighthawks and military arriving at any time, he didn't feel that he had enough time to set up the ritual of summoning himself, responding to himself, and then going up above the gray fog and channeling the spirit.
I should give up when it's necessary.
Klein silently muttered to himself, and he withdrew his hand from Lenevis's body. This crazy swindler seemed to be in a hurry when escaping. He didn't bring any cash, materials, or charms. He only had an eye-sized badge on him which coruscated a faint spirituality radiance. Klein wasn't afraid that this item could be used to locate him, as he planned on throwing it above the gray fog later to study it slowly. Therefore, he stood up and put the badge in his pocket. He stole a glance at Lenevis's corpse, and without waiting for the Beyonder characteristic to appear, he used his left black-gloved hand to remove the remaining tarot cards. Then he stretched out his left arm and placed his palm directly above the Lenevis's corpse. All of a sudden, Klein released his grip, allowing the tarot cards to fall like leaves cascading over the headless corpse. Some of them faced up with pictures and numbers printed on them, whilst others had dark red patterns on their backs. After doing all of this, Klein took out Ezek's copper whistle and tossed it a few times. Then, without looking back, he ran deep into the sewers. After almost 2 minutes, figures finally arrived at this place. Some of them were wearing thick black trench coats, while others were wearing well-tailored military uniforms. The leader of the group was Krestetz Sesemir, who was carrying a pure white bone sword. His red gloves were smeared with dust, and his determined face showed obvious signs of fatigue and frailty. They stopped a few meters away from the body, and through the means of their night vision, they could see Lenevis's corpse and his head against the wall. There were 2 tarot cards stuck in his head. One was the Emperor, and the other was Wheel of Fortune. The headless body was covered with even more cards, each separately depicting the Chariot, the Hermit, Death, and more cards of different suits comprising of chalice, scepters, etc. On the walls and on the ground around him there were also tarot cards such as the Devil, the Sun, and Judgment. It all looked like the scene of some bizarre ritual, and Lenivis was the sacrificial offering that was destined to be sacrificed. Crested Sesamir drew a silent gasp as he knitted his brows tightly. The Beyonders around him fell into a momentary daze at the sight of this frightening and mysterious scene in the darkness. Far away from the scene of Lenivis's death, Klein quickly found an exit and left. He took off his clown mask and, in the shadows of the gas lamps, walked quickly towards East Borough. Before that, he had already dealt with the stains on the soles of his shoes. It was only when he reached Black Palm Street in the East Borough did he breathe a slight sigh of relief. Then he quickly held the ritual of summoning himself inside his rented one-bedroom apartment and responded to himself. In his spiritual body state, Klein moved all the clothes he had worn tonight, as well as the remaining charms, herbs, and essential oils, as well as the badge he had obtained from Lenivis, to the space above the gray fog. Then he used a spiritual flame to burn the corresponding clues. Phew! He exhaled, and finally had time to take a look at what the badge he had taken from Lenivis looked like. This badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the front was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes. You can join if you have this item.
What does it mean? Was Lenivis also a member of some secret organization?
Klein rubbed his temples. In a situation where he was physically and mentally exhausted, along with the fact that the timing wasn't right, he decided to give up on his research and leave it till after the Tarot Club's gathering. He quickly left the mysterious space above the gray fog, changed into another set of clothes, and removed his disguise. However, he was in no hurry to return to Minsk Street. He planned to sleep for the night before leaving. This was because it was easy to be inspected after midnight, especially when such an accident had just occurred. He lay down on the bed, looked out the window at the moonlight's encroaching of the darkness, and gradually calmed down. After completing his initial revenge, he felt that he had relieved himself of a lot of his burdens and lost a lot of his pressure. His mental state was clearly much better than before.
The present me isn't capable of handling Incy Zangwill and sealed artifact 008. Besides, the gap between us is huge. Only after becoming a high-sequence beyonder, a demigod, would I have the qualifications to involve myself in such matters. Before advancing to Sequence 4, I'll act as though they don't exist. Yea, for the foreseeable future, my goal is to work hard to improve myself. Now that I've completely digested the clown potion, I can advance to magician once the beyonder ingredients are gathered. There's still faceless, marionettist, and the corresponding Sequence 4, which I don't know the name of. Other than that, I'll just be an ordinary detective.
Klein's mind was calm and peaceful, and his thoughts were scattered as he thought about his future arrangements. He was no longer cranky or that depressed. As he thought about it, the corners of his lips curled up slightly as he silently muttered to himself.
Captain, Benson, Melissa, I believe all of you would prefer to see me like this.
At dawn, a group of people wearing surgical hats and white masks came to the dock union's dormitory. They were all dressed as doctors. The elder in the lead appeared to be rich in experience, as he said to the puzzled and confused residents.
We've discovered an infectious disease in this building. A person named Kevin has already passed away because of it. We will provide free treatment. This infectious disease has a special drug, and as long as you take it in time, you'll be fine.
Kevin?
One by one, the guests exclaimed in astonishment as they looked around for their colleague named Kevin. However, they didn't find him at all. That was Lenivis's alias. Seeing that the charity medical team was accompanied by police officers, the residents no longer had any doubts and began to line up nervously to collect their medicine. The first was a middle-aged man with a bushy beard. He nervously asked all sorts of questions, afraid that a single bottle of medicine wasn't potent enough to fight off the infectious disease. It wasn't until the doctors showed their impatience that he drank the blue bottle of medicine. Then he was helped to the side and aimed his mouth at a hole that was of the same size. Ugh, ugh, ugh. The man suddenly felt nauseous as he violently vomited a putrid blob of a bloody substance. He was about to prop himself up and cast his gaze to see what he had just vomited when two strong nurses yanked him away. The mouth-sized hole was located above an iron black metal barrel. The bottom of the barrel was dark and deep, with almost no light coming from it. And right there, a pool of yellowish-green liquid was quietly resting at the bottom. In the middle of the pool was a small piece of blood-colored meat. Ugh, ugh, ugh. One by one, the residents took the medicine and vomited in front of different metal barrels. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall.
Why did you suddenly visit so early?
Audrey looked at the sky outside. Then she looked at Viscount Glaint. Glaint looked around and only found a golden retriever sitting beside him. Hence, he whispered,
I was planning to go to the turf club, but I met Cance on the way. He told me something very interesting. It's truly interesting. Since I was passing by here, I thought of coming to share it with you.
What is it?
Audrey asked with interest. Glaint didn't deliberate over his words as he replied,
You should have heard of the Aurora Order, right? It was the Aurora Order that assassinated the Incatus ambassador. They were caught, with several important members killed, and a very large ploy was foiled as a result.
I thought it was something related to the godhood of the true creator. CO and Fours sent someone to report the information yesterday evening, and it just so happened that an operation was held last night. Wait, the Aurora Order apparently worships the true creator.
Audrey's eyes lit up. She pressed in a reserved tone.
What ploy?
I don't know, Cance refused to say. He just told me that the person in charge of this ploy was once a wanted swindler, a swindler named Lesnevis.
Glaint spread out his right hand.
As expected.
Audrey nodded indiscernibly. She didn't conceal her curiosity and asked,
Was he caught?
He's dead, but he wasn't killed by our people.
Glaint paused for a moment.
This is what I meant by interesting. When his body was found, it was covered with many tarot cards. Same for the surroundings. You can imagine that scene.
Tarot cards? The body was covered with tarot cards? Audrey was startled at first before it hit her. This was done by our tarot club. It was Mr. Fool's blessed.
Chapter 289, Conjecture and Investigation. Audrey, who thought she knew the truth, couldn't help but imagine the scene described by Viscount Glaint. Lesnevis lying in the mud in the darkness, covered with rows and rows of tarot cards. There's the Fool, Justice, the Hanged Man, the Sun, the World, and the other major arcana cards, and numerous numbered cards. They would either be overturned or facing right up, and there would be some left unturned, exposing only their backs, as if they were all part of a large-scale, eerie tarot divination. This kind of scene must be very shocking.
I wonder where the card for justice landed. How would the Beyonders of MI9 and the Church view this matter? Would they believe that a new secret organization has appeared? By possessing the godhood of the true creator, the ploy between Lesnevis and the Aurora Order must definitely be significant. It definitely would have brought a terrible disaster to Backland in the kingdom. Yet this ploy was so easily foiled because of a simple mission Mr. Fool had issued. This is a tussle at the level of deities? Mr. Fool and the true creator are considered arch-enemies. It's no wonder he calls the other party the fallen creator.
Many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as her body trembled faintly and imperceptibly. Viscount Glaint, who was sitting opposite, finally couldn't hold it in any further as he asked in puzzlement,
What are you thinking about?
Audrey abruptly snapped out of her reverie. Slightly cocking her head, she smiled and said,
Didn't you tell me to imagine the scene of the corpse being covered with tarot cards?
Glaint awkwardly smiled and sighed.
Haha. I wonder which secret organization's member killed Lesnevis. It really matches how I imagine such things to be like. It's so cool.
It's our tarot club.
Audrey answered silently as she smiled.
Perhaps there's no organization but the independent act of a powerful Beyonder?
Glaint said in excitement.
Regardless, I like this style. Urge Zhao and Force and ask them when they can find my apothecary formula.
Audrey widened her eyes slightly. Looking around her, she lowered her voice and said,
Hush, keep it down. How can you talk about potions here?
Glaint gave an indifferent smile.
Don't worry, it's nothing. I had already confirmed that other than you and me, there's only a dog.
The huge golden retriever Susie unconsciously shifted her position. North Borough in Backland. Inside a room beneath the St. Samuel Cathedral. Daly, who was wearing a black hooded robe and makeup with blue eyeshadow and red blush, gave off a charming yet cold feeling. She randomly found a seat and picked up the document on the table. She swept through it before her gaze suddenly froze. Her brows immediately furrowed, and she suppressed something as she asked,
Lenevis? Why wasn't I informed of this matter? Why didn't you inform me about the operation last night?
Sitting at the seat of honor, Crested Sesamir, who had hidden his chin and lips back into his propped-up collar, said deeply,
I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to control your emotions. That would have brought unnecessary danger to the operation, so I didn't get anyone to inform you. I can understand how you feel. A Nighthawk from the Tingen Squad is currently undergoing guidance and training at the Holy Cathedral. He plans on joining the Red Gloves, and his performance is about equal to yours. But as the person in charge of the operation, and as a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks, I had to eliminate all unstable elements.
Daly looked at the other Nighthawk squad captains and deacons, and she sneered.
Why do you think I won't be able to control my own emotions? I'm very calm, and I won't act rashly. My anger will only erupt after Lenevis is caught. This is the professional bearing of a veteran Nighthawk and a deacon. If I had caught Lenevis, I would let him know that men can be weak too. I would make sure that a cold, rotten, yet stiff corpse would be situated behind his buttocks. I would make sure that a pungent white bone filled with thorns would be situated in front of him. I'd make it so that those cold little fellows enter and leave his body wherever they can. Damn it, you actually managed to let him die just like that.
Crested Sesamir looked at Daly calmly and sighed after silently listening to her until she was done.
How long have you been putting up with it?
Daly froze, then muttered in frustration, like a deflated ball.
For a very long time.
Sesamir retracted his gaze and cast them towards the other deacons and captains.
Got anything?
A deacon reported based on the findings.
From our preliminary investigations, the person who killed Lenevis is a member of the Secret Order, a Sequence 8 of the potion name Clown. He's adept at using paper cards as flying knives. However, we are unable to confirm this guess. The tarot cards scattered across the corpse don't seem like they were concealing something. After all, the Beyonder didn't deal with the cards on the wall and in Lenevis's head. We all believe the final scene was more of a ritual or a symbolism. Therefore, we suspect that the Beyonder might belong to an organization we don't understand. Of course, the scene might also just be a personal preference of his.
Sesamir nodded slightly and said,
We can start from that point and proceed with a follow-up investigation. Ayor, any updates on the person who tipped us off?
The charming middle-aged man, Ayer Harson, flipped the papers in his hand and said,
We investigated the person and discovered that his actions were directed by a bounty hunter. In the process of looking for the wanted criminal, Lenevis, the bounty hunter's companion, was killed by a member of the Aurora Order. In order to exact revenge, she secretly carried out an investigation and eventually locked onto the target at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Baleham Dock. Based on the target's actions and lifestyle, she discovered Lenevis. Her actions have basically been verified by witnesses. There isn't anything strange about it. We also used Beyonder means to confirm that she has no connection with the person who killed Lenevis. She's in hiding now, and it's very hard to find her.
Sesamir added while seemingly in thought,
This fits very well with Lenevis's description, that the radical and insane members of the Aurora Order were helping him out. Is there any problem with the reporter who did the interview at the Union that afternoon?
Another captain of the Nighthawks reported,
He was a fake reporter, and according to news from the police department, he's actually a private detective who had previously helped Mike Joseph of the Daily Observer. Joseph was investigating the murder of Cyber. We suspect that he got some kind of lead, found the Dock Union, and disguised himself to get in touch with everyone who was suspected of being the killer. This guess has already been confirmed by Isengard Stanton.
Casimir acknowledged it before switching to ask about other people who had recently come into contact with Lenevis, but similarly got answers that there was nothing wrong with them. Towards the end, he said after some deliberation,
I'm very confused by the lack of motive for the murder of Lenevis. That mysterious murderer deserves our attention. You should continue to follow up on this matter. In addition, according to common sense, the Aurora Order definitely wouldn't only have Beyonders at the Rose Bishop and Shadow Ascetic level in a big city like Backland. There should at least be an Oracle, or perhaps even a Saint. Their ploy of receiving the true Creator's descent has failed. With their crazy and irrational traits, I'm worried that they'll launch a series of retaliatory acts. All of you are to be on high alert in the near future. I'll also be staying in Backland.
The deacons and captains replied solemnly.
Yes, Reverend Sesamir.
Crested Sesamir paused for a few seconds before adding,
The events of the Magosi incident in Tingen and last night's incident with Lenevis have revealed a problem. The industrial area, the dock area, and East Borough have become hotbeds for the descent and nurturing of evil gods. You are to send people to investigate and gather the truth about the situation. If it truly is as Lenevis had described, I'll raise this matter at the Council of Cardinals, formally exerting pressure on the kingdom and the government to bring about the corresponding changes as soon as possible.
Klein slept in and didn't wake up until it was late. However, it still wasn't bright enough outside. The area was still shrouded in fog, making it dark and cold.
This doesn't fit with my splendid mood,
he grumbled. After changing his clothes and taking his key, he returned to Minsk Street unnoticed. After changing from his worker's uniform to casual home attire, a shirt and sweater, and after confirming that no one came investigating his identity as a private detective, he was completely at ease. He leisurely went out to the butcher and grocery store to buy food in preparation for a sumptuous lunch for himself. There was some afternoon sun in Backland, and Klein lazily basked in its worth, momentarily having no desire to do anything. He waited until 15 minutes to 3, then he took out his golden pocket watch for a glance, before returning to the bedroom and going above the gray fog. After conjuring the fake world and familiarizing himself with its controls, he sat down on the high-back chair at one end of the table and gave a message to the sun that he was to prepare for his participation in the gathering. At precisely 3, according to Backland time, streaks of crimson light soared out of the vast and ancient palace, outlining blurry figures which were equally indistinct. Audrey directly looked towards the seat of honor and said cheerfully,
Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The simple mission you entrusted has been completed.
She had deliberately emphasized the word simple in order to ascertain from Mr. Fool whether Lenevis had really been eliminated by his blessed. She wanted to know if the tarot card-covered death scene was a symbol of the Tarot Club. Klein deliberately acted composed as he said with a smile.
I'm already aware.
After saying that, he sighed.
In such an age, in such a place like Backland, in such a place in the East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district, they're the hotbeds for an evil god's descent.
What? Why would a simple mission involve hotbeds for an evil god's descent?
Alger was stunned for a moment, wondering if there was something wrong with his ears. Chapter 290. Affecting Change Indirectly. Alger Wilson tried to remember what had happened the last gathering. He couldn't understand what it had to do with the hotbed of an evil god's descent.
I remember that the simple mission given by Mr. Fool was for the sole purpose of examining 2 people for their candidacy of joining the gathering. The general idea was to find the person in the portrait, and that person was confirmed to be in Backland. Wasn't it just the search for someone? Furthermore, it was the kind of task which didn't pose much of a threat. Was there a deeper purpose behind Mr. Fool's simple mission? Was this a silent contest between deities?
Many thoughts went through the hangman's mind instantly, and he almost couldn't stop himself from asking Justice, tempted to pay in order to understand what exactly was going on. However, as a veteran official beyonder, a seafarer who steered an ancient ghost ship, he was experienced and shrewd. He forcefully suppressed his impulse and planned to go through the internal channels of the Church of Storms to find out about the recent events in Backland. As for Audrey, she instantly understood what Mr. Fool's sigh meant. She immediately understood the entire situation regarding LaNevis.
So it turns out that the bit of godhood that LaNevis possessed was the basic foundation for the descent of the true creator into the real world. The harsh situation in Eastborough, the dock area, and the factory area, however, was a hotbed that provided him rapid nurturing and strengthening. With a simple mission, Mr. Fool stopped the true creator's great conspiracy and saved the whole of Backland.
Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table, her eyes sparkling brightly. Unconsciously, she brimmed with admiration. At this moment, the gloomy and reserved world let out a chuckle and said,
Yes, every time I see and hear about a large number of child laborers dying in their teens, and how most workers rarely live past 30 due to extreme exhaustion and the terrible environment, or how after barely surviving the previous tests, and as a result of their old age and the loss of their jobs, they can only wander the streets and die of hunger and cold, I have no doubt about the existence of an evil god. These gods are on the ground in Eastborough, the dock area, and the factory area. Well, there's even been a report that some factory workers have a hard time surviving 5 years. In the East Borough of Backland, there is a saying that among the people who live there, without exception, any person who's a grandfather must be from the countryside. The meaning of this sentence is that people living there won't have a third generation, as they can't have grandchildren. Poverty and hunger make their children very thin. Work that's difficult to adapt to causes them to quickly wither away in Backland, much less getting married and conceiving the next generation.
This was the first time Audrey heard Mr. World speak so much. She was suddenly plunged into deep shock and confusion.
Why don't I know anything about this? The newspapers and magazines I read only mention that the residents of Eastborough are having a hard time. This is far worse than being laborious.
Audrey's eyes lost their focus for a moment. She felt as if her understanding of the kingdom and the world had been completely overturned. Suddenly she understood why Mr. Fool had uttered such a sigh, and why in such an age, such a Backland, in such an East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district were the hotbeds of an evil god's descent.
We can't go on like this. Otherwise, Backland will one day be destroyed because of this.
Audrey felt a strong urge to go back and learn more, to remind her father, Earl Hall. She wanted to use the powers of a spectator and a telepathist to secretly guide the governmental policies that would improve the lives of the pitiful people in East Borough, the docks area, and the factory district. At the end of the long bronze table, Klein quietly observed Miss Justice's reaction. He had purposely lamented a while ago and used his smurf, the world, to give a detailed explanation. He wanted this noble, one who still had a semblance of purity, to realize the seriousness of the problem and use her to push for change in the kingdom.
Before I become faceless, I must clearly remember that I cannot be personally involved in such matters.
He silently set such a boundary for himself. Audrey held back her emotions and sincerely thanked the two gentlemen at the two ends of the table.
Thank you, Mr. Fool. Thank you for saving Backland. Your sigh has made me understand the problem at its roots. Thank you, Mr. World. You have made me understand a great deal of the situation I didn't know in the past.
Saved Backland?
Alger was no stranger to the conditions of East Borough, the factory district, and the dock area. He was more surprised by the description Miss Justice had used.
Just how huge was this matter?
He thought with an extremely puzzled frown. The son, on the other hand, listened quite attentively, and although he couldn't understand all of it, he still listened attentively, hoping to learn more about the regions where Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and Mr. World were located. Klein only smiled in response to Miss Justice's gratitude and didn't do anything further. He then turned to look at the Hanged Man. Alger immediately understood what he meant, and he quickly conjured the last page of the promised Roselle's diary. Klein received it out of thin air and took a casual glance at it.
14th January. I discovered a problem. If unconscious high-sequence beyonder objects are not sealed, they would unconsciously attract nearby low-sequence beyonders from the same pathway, causing them to come into contact with each other. The higher the original sequence, the more likely that this will happen. However, This situation doesn't seem to be a constant. It seems to be intermittent.
This diary entry immediately jolted Klein to attention because he had made similar guesses before. After he came to Backland, he soon found himself intertwined with the secret order, with a Beyonder of the Seer pathway, and thus found himself in an extremely passive and extremely dangerous situation. However, he had also obtained the corresponding sequences 7, 6, and 5 potion formulas as a result. At the time, he had suspected that his transmigration involved secrets that gave him the power to resurrect, and that he would occasionally attract people and objects related to the Seer pathway, such as the Antigonus family's notebook or members of the Secret Order. After seeing this diary entry of Emperor Roselle, Klein suddenly had a new idea. He used the corner of his eyes to scan the thick gray fog and the illusory dark red stars below him. He muttered to himself in silence.
Could it be that the one who created that attractive force wasn't me, but this gray fog, the mysterious space above the gray fog? This could also be considered as a secret behind my transmigration.
Without any further clues or information, Klein quickly gathered his thoughts and read the second diary entry.
16th January. The taste of a demoness ain't bad.
The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, unsure of what expression he should show.
Emperor, I have underestimated you. There's really nothing stopping you. Don't you care about the other person's previous gender? Don't you care about her experience during the pleasure phase?
Suppressing the urge to exhale, Klein looked at the last entry in the diary in his hands.
20th January. I finished making the second card of blasphemy. Let me think. Where should I hide it? Yes, I plan to disguise it as a bookmark and insert it into a very valuable book. If the person who obtains it isn't someone fated, it would be hard to imagine that the most valuable thing in the book is actually that seemingly ordinary bookmark. Not bad. That's a good idea.
Emperor, why can't you explain more clearly? Which book did the bookmark go into? Before I read this, I was so happy thinking that I can follow the clues and obtain a card of blasphemy containing the profound secrets of the deities.
Klein was disappointed and let his gaze linger on the last paragraph.
I hope that there will be more specific information in the future entries of the Emperor's diary.
He comforted himself with this sentence, leaned back, and said with a smile,
You can start your discussion freely now.
At that moment, the son Derek raised his hand, having learned it from Miss Justice, and said,
Mr. World, the Beyonder weapon you gave me far exceeds my expectations. I've already accumulated enough contribution points to trade for the ingredients to advance to Sequence 8. I'll use the remaining contribution points to hire helpers to obtain a chance to obtain the true root and juice of the mistreat. I'll be able to complete the deal soon.
He explained in great detail, worried that his reputation of keeping his word would be suspected and destroyed. Of course, he was telling the truth. Although the axe didn't match some of his expectations for a Beyonder weapon, its power shocked him.
That axe can create a powerful lightning bolt in just 2 or 3 strikes, and with the temporary boost from my bard's powers, I can easily fight in close quarters with a Sequence 7 monster. If I were to encounter a monster that's afraid of lightning, I could even easily finish it. I'm now a light suppliant with a certain level of magical spells. My strength has been raised qualitatively, and I can fight against even more powerful monsters.
Derek Berg felt that he had fallen in love with that Beyonder weapon. In the City of Silver, its potency was one of the reasons to like it. The surrounding darkness and monsters in the depths of the darkness forced them to obey this rule for generations. The gloomy world nodded under Klein's control. He then looked around and asked again,
Lady, sirs, do you have any clues regarding the dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or Spring of the Elves marrow crystals?
Audrey shook her head without hesitation. After musing for a few seconds, Alger suddenly said,
There will be a grand event held on the Sonia Sea soon. Ships from the 4 pirate kings and the 6 pirate admirals will be participating. I should call them the 7 pirate admirals. Another person has joined the ranks. There'll definitely be transactions of Beyonder ingredients at such an event. It's very likely that the not very rare dark-patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or Spring of the Elves marrow crystals will appear. I have the opportunity to participate in this event, but what can you offer in exchange? I'm sure you don't have the potion formula for Wind Blessed, and that it'll be very difficult for you to find it in the future too.